Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. It's Christmas Day, and we've got a pretty packed news roundup for you all. From plane crashes to political turmoil, we're going to unpack the biggest stories from around the world today and figure out just what they mean.
It's certainly been a Christmas to remember. You got that right.
Okay, well, let's start off with some breaking news out of Kazakhstan. A passenger plane carrying 98 people crashed earlier today, so the really grim scene.
Absolutely tragic. The Azerbaijan Airlines flight was heading from Baku to Grozny in Russia, but it had to divert because of really heavy fog.
Mhm.
Looks like the plane tried to make an emergency landing near Aktau, but tragically burst into flames on impact.
Yeah, the footage is just awful. It's hard to watch. You see the aircraft coming in so fast, landing gear down, and then suddenly this just massive fireball.
As of right now, the Kazakh authorities are saying 38 people have died in the crash. Early reports from Russian media, though unconfirmed, are pointing to a possible bird strike as a contributing factor. We'll have to wait for the official investigation, though.
Yeah, that'll be important to get more details. It's just a real stark reminder of how fragile things are, especially when you think about air travel. I mean, it's inherently risky, right? And when you add bad weather conditions on top of it.
I completely agree with you. Azerbaijan Airlines has now grounded all flights between Baku and both Grozny and Makhachkala until they finish a complete investigation. Hopefully the recovery of the black box will give us some answers.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's shift gears now over to Syria. The new rebel-led government there is facing some really serious challenges.
Oh, definitely a tense situation for sure. A deadly ambush just recently. It killed 14 Interior Ministry personnel, happened near the port of Tartus. It was carried out by forces still loyal to that ousted president, Bashar al-Assad.
Right. And this just, really highlights the fact that Syria is still so unstable, even after that regime change. And what's even more concerning is why this ambush even happened. It wasn't random.
Not at all. The security forces were actually trying to arrest a former officer, and this officer was connected to Saidnaya prison. That's when it gets really interesting, because Saidnaya has this horrific reputation: torture, extrajudicial killings, just the worst human rights abuses. So this whole arrest attempt and then the violent response it caused, it points to some really deep tensions.
For sure. Tensions within the country. It's like everyone's just on edge waiting for the next shoe to drop. And then to make things worse, there's been this unrest. Curfews have been imposed in cities like Homs.
Right, and that unrest comes from a video that surfaced online. It supposedly shows an attack on an Alawite shrine. Now, the Syrian Interior Ministry claims this video is old, but it still sparked all these protests and outrage, which is no surprise when you think about it. I mean, the Alawite sect, that's the minority group that the Assad family belongs to.
So it doesn't really matter if it's old news or a current event. That video, it taps into some deep fears, especially for minorities in Syria. It makes you wonder if this new leadership can really protect them.
Yeah, good point. Exactly. And then you have HTS, the Islamist faction. They're in charge of Syria now. But a lot of countries, they consider them a terrorist organization. So there's a lot of skepticism about if they're really committed to minority rights, especially with that incident with the Christmas tree being burned.
Right. That didn't really inspire a lot of confidence, did it? I mean, they keep saying they will uphold everyone's rights, but, their actions, they don't always match their words. I think the international community is watching them very closely.
For sure. No, from trouble and a transition to a tragedy, we're going to shift to Germany.
Yeah, this weekend in Magdeburg, there was this just truly horrific attack.
Yeah.
A car plowed through this crowded Christmas market, killed 5 people, injured over 200.
Devastating event. And what makes it even more disturbing is the person who did it, the attacker's profile. He was a 50-year-old Saudi refugee. Kaleb al-Abdulmusin was his name.
Right. And that's where it gets really complicated, because his background doesn't fit the typical pattern at all. We've seen with past attacks, those that are linked to Islamist extremism, this just doesn't fit that.
Listen, at all. Al-Abdulmusin, he was actually critical of Islam. He was reportedly a supporter of that far-right AFD party, the one that wants stricter immigration control. And they have a history, of being anti-Muslim.
So it's a really confusing picture. What does all of this mean?
Well, it's definitely thrown the upcoming election in Germany into even more turmoil. I mean, immigration and security, those have become the central issues in the campaign, and this has just intensified everything. The AfD, they're gaining popularity, and now they're using this to push their agenda.
Yeah. And as you'd expect, their response has been met with a mix of support and condemnation. Some people think that they're just exploiting the tragedy. For political gain. But then others are really worried about security. And they think that the AFD is the only party that's actually addressing those concerns.
And it's not just political fallout either. This attack has exposed some really deep divisions within German society. There's a real fear of backlash against migrants and just a further erosion of social cohesion.
I was reading some quotes from people in Magdeburg. It's just heartbreaking. They're expressing shock, grief, obviously, but also this deep sense of anxiety about the future. Some of them are worried that migrants are going to be scapegoated for the actions of this one individual.
Yeah, I understand that worry. It's a valid concern because this attack could be used to justify some discriminatory policies and fuel more prejudice. But there is some hope. Amidst all the darkness, there are these little glimmers of hope. Anti-racism groups have actually organized counter-protests. They're pushing back against what the AfD is saying. They're calling for unity. And the German president, he made this really powerful plea for the nation to stand together against hatred and division.
Yeah, that message of unity is just so important right now. We can't let fear and division win.
Exactly. But there are also some serious questions about security, right? Because it turns out that this attacker was known to the authorities, but they thought the threat he posed was too unspecific. So that raises some uncomfortable questions. How are they making these security assessments? How effective are they?
And on top of that, there was a security lapse that allowed him to even drive into the market in the first place. Apparently, there was a gap left open for emergency access that wasn't secured properly.
Really troubling, those oversights. They point to potential systemic issues, don't they, that need to be addressed immediately.
Definitely a complex situation with no easy answers. The Christmas market has reopened, but there's this very somber atmosphere.
Yeah.
And the trauma from it all, it's still very present.
It's a stark reminder that tragedy can really strike anywhere, at any time, even during the holidays.
All right, well, let's take a look at what happened in Ukraine today. Christmas Day saw another attack on their energy infrastructure.
Yeah, sadly not unexpected. Russian forces unleashed a bunch of missiles and drones, targeted key energy facilities all across Ukraine.
And the timing,
Yeah.
Christmas Day. It just makes it all that much more cruel. President Zelensky condemned the attacks, said they were inhumane, and a deliberate attempt to deprive Ukrainians of heat and electricity during the winter.
The Ukrainian Air Force said they detected something like 184 missiles and drones. Thankfully, their air defenses intercepted or neutralized quite a few of them. But the attacks still caused significant damage. Widespread power outages. Even in Kyiv, in the capital.
Can you imagine celebrating Christmas like that? Families huddled in metro stations to take shelter, the holidays completely overshadowed by fear, and the constant threat of violence. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. But the resilience of the Ukrainian people just never ceases to amaze me. Despite everything, they're still determined to celebrate, to hold on to hope even in the midst of all this darkness.
Yeah. There was a quote I read from a resident named Alexandra. She just said, "Christmas is not canceled." And I think that says it all.
It's a powerful message of defiance and hope for sure. And this is the second time that Ukraine has celebrated Christmas on December 25th. Traditionally, they followed the Julian calendar, like Russia. But this shift is really symbolic. It distances them from Russia's influence and aligns them more with the West.
It's a powerful statement for sure about their identity and their desire to embrace Western values.
It is. But let's not forget, the war is far from over. The humanitarian situation is still really dire. For example, after those attacks, 500,000 people in Kharkiv were left without water, electricity, or heating.
Unimaginable. Especially with these freezing temperatures, international aid is going to be crucial in helping these communities survive the winter.
And there's another worrying element to all of this. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha reported that a Russian missile crossed through Moldovan and Romanian airspace.
Wow, that's a major escalation.
Moldova condemned it, obviously. And this incident just really underscores the fact that this conflict threatens the whole region's stability. It could easily spill over Ukraine's borders. It's just very volatile, needs to be monitored very carefully, and handled with diplomacy to prevent things from getting even worse.
Speaking of volatile situations, let's move on to the tensions between Israel and Hamas. The Israeli military recently concluded an investigation that found their actions on the ground might have influenced the killing of 6 hostages in Gaza back in August.
This is a very sensitive issue, a lot of layers to it. The investigation concluded that while Israeli ground operations in the Rafah area were carried out cautiously, they might have inadvertently led Hamas to execute those hostages.
Right. And the discovery of their bodies sparked outrage in Israel. People are demanding answers and accountability. It's just a tragedy that's further deepened the mistrust, the animosity between the two sides.
And the investigation found something else, too, that's really tragic, a lack of awareness. The Israeli soldiers involved, they had no idea those hostages were even there when they started their operation. It raises some really serious questions about intelligence gathering and communication, especially in situations with such high stakes.
Definitely. And these killings have just intensified calls for a ceasefire and the release of all the hostages held by Hamas. Their families are just desperate for them to come home safely.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's been under enormous pressure to get them released. But negotiations with Hamas are incredibly complex, delicate. There's been talk of progress, but a real breakthrough, it still seems far off.
It just reminds us that this conflict, with its immense human cost, is nowhere near over. And the humanitarian situation in Gaza, it remains dire. Millions of people are displaced, facing critical shortages of food, water, medical supplies.
The international community needs to keep pushing for a lasting ceasefire and a solution that addresses the root causes of this conflict, because the suffering on both sides is just unimaginable.
Moving on, there's a story developing that really highlights how devastating bird flu is. And I'm not just talking about birds. It's affecting other animals now, too.
Yeah, this is a worrying development. A wildlife sanctuary in Washington state reported the deaths of 20 big cats, tigers, cougars, lynx. And it's all because of bird flu.
It's a real wake-up call, isn't it? That this virus, which usually spreads among birds, can jump species. And now it's threatening other animals, mammals included.
The sanctuary has been quarantined to try to stop the spread, and they're just devastated by the loss of these amazing animals.
Such a tragedy. And it really underscores how interconnected everything is in the natural world, and how these diseases can have such far-reaching impacts.
This outbreak raises concerns about the virus mutating and becoming easier to spread to humans. It needs to be watched very closely.
Now, for a story about how fragile law and order can be, especially when a country is in political turmoil. Over 1,500 prisoners escaped from a prison in Mozambique.
This happened during protests sparked by those disputed election results. The ruling Frelimo party was declared the winner. But there have been a lot of accusations of rigging, and it's fueled unrest and distrust.
It seems like the prisoners just took advantage of the chaos, overwhelmed the guards, and broke free.
It's a dangerous situation that just highlights the challenges Mozambique and its government are facing right now.
Mozambique has been struggling with violence and instability ever since the election. This is just another symptom of a much deeper crisis.
The authorities are trying to recapture those escaped prisoners. But this has definitely increased anxiety and created this feeling of lawlessness. It feels like things could really spiral out of control.
The international community needs to urge calm and dialogue to prevent more violence and instability. A peaceful resolution to this political crisis. That's the only way to restore order and keep everyone in Mozambique safe.
Okay, well, let's take a break from the heavy stuff for just a second. In a bit of lighter news, the bald eagle has finally officially been declared the national bird of the United States. It's kind of surprising it took this long, right? I mean, the bald eagle has been a national emblem since 1782. It's on the Great Seal of the U.S., countless official documents.
You'd think they would have made it official a while ago, but apparently it took an act of Congress signed into law by President Biden just yesterday.
One of those head-scratcher moments, for sure. But hey, at least that majestic bald eagle finally has the recognition it deserves.
It's a nice reminder that even amidst all the political turmoil and global crises, we can still celebrate the symbols that unite us.
Absolutely. A little welcome lightheartedness. A reminder that even in tough times, there's still beauty and wonder in the world.
And now, for a story that's creating a lot of buzz. Former President Donald Trump is back in the headlines with some bold pronouncements.
Well, he never shies away from controversy, does he? This time, he's talking about Greenland and the Panama Canal, suggesting that the U.S. should take control of them.
And his remarks have been met with a mix of amusement and concern, to say the least. Greenland, it's an autonomous Danish territory. They've firmly stated it's not for sale.
And Panama has pushed back, too, asserting their sovereignty over the canal.
What's interesting is what he's claiming about the Panama Canal. He says the U.S. is being overcharged to use the waterway. He's even threatened to demand its return.
Classic Trump, playing to his America First base. He seems to be signaling that he's willing to use the U.S. military and its economic power to get his way, even if it means messing up global relations.
Yeah, it's a strategy he used during his presidency, often resorted to tariffs and threats to get other countries to do what he wanted.
For sure. It remains to be seen how these pronouncements will actually play out, but it's created a lot of tension, diplomatic tension. And it's raised some concerns about his potential approach to foreign policy.
Let's pivot to a message of peace and reconciliation. Pope Francis, in his Christmas Day address, made this heartfelt plea for negotiations to end the war in Ukraine.
His call for dialogue comes at a really tense time, especially with those recent attacks on their energy infrastructure.
Yeah. The Pope urged both Ukraine and Russia to show some boldness and open the door to negotiations. He really emphasized the need for a just and lasting peace.
His message has received mixed responses, of course. A lot of people support his call for peace, but some, especially in Ukraine, see it as naive. Appeasement. They say that negotiating with Russia right now is just impossible.
It's a complex situation, deeply entrenched positions, a long history of mistrust. But the Pope's message, regardless of how it's received, reminds us that peace needs to be the priority.
His words do carry a lot of weight, coming from a place of moral authority. Hopefully they'll inspire those involved to at least consider dialogue, even if it seems difficult.
Okay, now shifting over to Haiti, the news there is still being dominated by violence and instability. There was a shooting at Haiti's largest public hospital. It killed at least 3 people, 2 journalists and a police officer.
This happened during a press briefing to announce that the hospital was reopening. It had been occupied and damaged by gangs, just a devastating event. It highlights the danger and the lawlessness in Haiti right now.
The Viv Anson Gang Alliance, which controls a large part of the capital, Port-au-Prince, has claimed responsibility for the attack.
It's just shocking, their brazenness, their disregard for human life.
Haiti has been dealing with this surge in gang violence ever since the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse back in 2021. It's just been a downward spiral since then.
The country's in a full-blown crisis. Gangs are in control of huge areas. They're terrorizing the population. The international community has sent in a peacekeeping force, but things are still really volatile.
It's a tragedy, and the Haitian people are the ones caught in the crossfire.
Heartbreaking. Well, now for a story that captures the really mixed emotions of this Christmas season, especially in a region marked by all this conflict and hardship.
We're talking about Bethlehem, the traditional birthplace of Jesus. This year's Christmas celebrations are muted, to say the least. The war in Gaza has just cast a long shadow.
Yeah, this is the second year in a row that public festivities have been canceled in Bethlehem. It's a way for them to show solidarity with those who are suffering in Gaza.
The atmosphere there is somber. A lot of Palestinian Christians are expressing despair, and they're questioning the silence of the international community.
They feel isolated, abandoned. Their joy is just completely overshadowed by the suffering they see every day. The war in Gaza, it's taken such a heavy toll on both Palestinians and Israelis.
Right, and what's happening in Bethlehem reflects that broader tragedy. Peace feels far away. And that true spirit of Christmas, hope and goodwill. It's hard to sustain when there's this constant conflict.
It's a heartbreaking situation, and there aren't any easy answers.
Okay, well, turning our attention now to Brazil, there's a developing situation that's got authorities very worried. A bridge collapse, and there are fears of a toxic spill.
Yeah, this happened just a couple of days ago. The central span of a bridge connecting Tocantins and Maranhão collapsed. Vehicles went plunging into the river below.
The death toll is already at 14. And over 10 people are still missing.
What makes it even more concerning is that 3 lorries carrying pesticides and sulfuric acid were among the vehicles that went down.
Right, so this is a potential environmental disaster waiting to happen. Authorities are warning people not to use water from the river. And there are real fears about contamination.
Emergency responders are racing against time to try to contain any potential spill and assess the environmental damage.
And now for a story that's going to take us into the world of high faction and some really dark allegations. Mike Jeffries, the former CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch, has been arrested. He's been charged with running this international sex trafficking and prostitution ring.
Wow. That's a shocker. Jeffries, he was head of that clothing brand for over 20 years.
The allegations are really disturbing. They paint this picture of him using his power and his wealth to exploit aspiring models.
It's a reminder that power, wealth, and status can be used to do horrible things, and that no one is above the law.
Right. The case is still under investigation. Jeffries is denying all charges. But it sent shockwaves through the fashion industry. It makes you question the culture.
It's a story that's going to continue to unfold.
Okay. Well, let's head back to the Vatican. Pope Francis has launched a special Jubilee year for Roman Catholics.
Yeah, this is a rare event. Happens once every 25 years. It's a time for reflection, forgiveness, spiritual renewal.
The Pope opened the Holy Door at St. Peter's Basilica, a symbolic gesture. a pathway to grace and reconciliation.
Millions of pilgrims are going to travel to Rome to participate in this.
Even in a world with so much conflict and turmoil, it's a reminder that that search for meaning, that spiritual connection, it's still so powerful.
It speaks to the enduring power of faith, comfort, hope.
Okay, let's wrap things up with something a bit more alarming. Fireworks caused a major house fire in Massachusetts.
Happened in Spencer. 2 homes were totally destroyed. The video footage of the fire, it shows fireworks exploding amidst the flames. Really chaotic scene.
Thankfully, no one was hurt. But those families lost everything. They're still investigating the cause of the fire, but it's just another reminder of how dangerous fireworks can be.
It's a cautionary tale, especially during the holidays when they're so common.
Definitely been a Christmas Day news cycle with a lot of twists and turns.
Good reminder that life is never predictable.
And for those of you who want to keep unpacking these events with us, stay tuned for part 2.
We'll be diving into even more stories that have shaped this Christmas Day. We'll talk about that controversial ethics report in the U.S., the tragic accident in Brazil, and another message from Pope Francis.
Until then, thanks for joining us.
Welcome back to our Christmas Day News Roundup. We've got more stories to unpack. We're going to start with a development that's really rocking U.S. politics.
Yeah, we're talking about that House Ethics Committee report on Matt Gaetz, the former congressman, and he was a close ally of Donald Trump. And this report, it really reveals some serious allegations, everything from sexual misconduct and drug use to obstruction of justice.
The report was just released yesterday, and it really paints this pretty damning picture of his behavior when he was in Congress. The committee concluded that he was paying women for sex, using illegal drugs, and even tried to mess with their investigation.
Yeah. One of the most disturbing allegations is that he was involved with this 17-year-old girl. Now, the committee found that there's no evidence that he actually knew she was underage at the time. But it still raises some serious ethical questions, really.
Definitely does. And we can't forget his associate, Joel Greenberg. He's already in prison for sex trafficking, and it involves that same girl.
This report, it doesn't just focus on those details, though. It also looks into his finances. It reveals all these complex transactions that seem designed to hide payments for sex and drugs. It's just a really clear picture of someone abusing their power and then trying to cover it all up.
And the committee also found that Gaetz was using marijuana a lot. He even made a fake email account to buy it. And he also supposedly accepted gifts that go beyond what House members are allowed to accept, like a trip to the Bahamas that was funded by someone connected to the marijuana industry.
It's a long list of violations. And the committee didn't hold back. They accused Gaetz of trying to deflect, deter, or mislead their investigation, basically obstructing justice.
Right. Well, Gaetz denies everything, of course. He's even accusing the committee of being politically motivated, saying that they're doing the bidding of former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and he actually resigned from Congress just a few days before this report came out.
Yeah. It's a messy situation. It's likely going to affect his political career, and it raises questions about accountability, ethical standards in U.S. politics.
Let's head back to Brazil. Remember that bridge collapse we were talking about earlier? The aftermath is becoming clearer. And, well, it's not good.
Yeah, it's not. And the news keeps getting worse. The death toll is now at least 14 people.
Rescue teams are still looking for survivors, but hopes are fading.
And beyond the human tragedy, the environmental impact is becoming really apparent. Authorities have said that at least one of the trucks that was carrying sulfuric acid ruptured when it hit the water.
Yeah, that's a serious threat to the ecosystem. It could harm aquatic life, contaminate the drinking water for all those communities downstream. They're trying to contain the spill, but it's a huge challenge.
And no one knows what happened to the other lorries that were carrying pesticides. If those have ruptured too, the environmental consequences could be even worse.
This just shows how vulnerable our infrastructure is, the devastating consequences when things go wrong for people and the environment.
Okay, well, let's shift to a message of hope and resilience amidst that conflict in Gaza. In his Christmas address, Pope Francis called for a ceasefire and the release of the hostages.
Yeah, his words really resonate. Coming from someone with that moral authority, he spoke directly to the Christians living in Gaza, expressed his worry for their safety.
He urged both sides to choose dialogue and peace to find a lasting solution.
It's a powerful reminder that even when things are so dark, we can't lose hope.
Speaking of hope and defiance, I love this story about how Ukrainians are using postage stamps. It's a message of resilience and even humor.
It's amazing how something so small can be so powerful.
Ukraine's postal service, Ukrposhta, has been releasing these stamps that have just caught everyone's attention. It's the artwork, but it's also the messages that are so captivating, bold, and often funny.
One of the most famous ones shows a Ukrainian soldier giving a Russian warship the finger. It's from that standoff at Snake Island early on in the war, when those soldiers refused to surrender.
And the crazy thing is that warship depicted on the stamp, the Moskva, it was actually sunk by the Ukrainians later.
It's the symbol of Ukrainian resistance now.
That stamp sold out in days, and Ukmposhta has kept releasing them, capturing that spirit. One has a Ukrainian tractor towing a captured Russian tank, and it says, "Good evening, we're from Ukraine."
It's been amazing for morale.
And collectors love them too. They showcase that creativity and resilience.
A great example of how even during tough times, humor and art can be so powerful.
All right. Well, for something a bit more lighthearted, the bald eagle is officially the national bird of the United States.
It's hard to believe it took so long, considering it's been a national symbol for centuries.
Right. You'd think it would have happened ages ago. But it took an act of Congress, and Biden signed it just yesterday.
Better late than never. Now it has the recognition it deserves.
It's nice to celebrate the things that unite us, even amidst all the chaos.
It is.
Well, Donald Trump is back in the headlines again with some bold pronouncements.
He always knows how to get people talking. This time, he set his sights on Greenland and the Panama Canal. Says the U.S. should take control of them.
His remarks have gotten a lot of attention, amusement, concern. Greenland, it's an autonomous Danish territory, has said that it's not for sale.
Panama has pushed back, too. They say they're in control of the canal.
It's what he's claiming about the Panama Canal that's really interesting. He says that the U.S. is being unfairly charged to use it, and he's even threatened to demand its return.
Sounds like classic Trump. America first. He's basically saying he's ready to use the U.S. military and its economic power to get what he wants.
Yeah. It's a familiar tactic from his presidency. Remember the tariffs and threats?
It's hard to say how these pronouncements will play out in reality, but they've definitely created some tension and raised questions about his potential foreign policy if he's elected again.
Okay. Let's talk about the occupied West Bank. Palestinian Christians are facing a very challenging Christmas this year.
The war in Gaza has really impacted Bethlehem, silencing celebrations.
The conflict has been devastating. So many lives lost. And for Palestinian Christians, it's incredibly difficult. They're feeling trapped, isolated.
A lot of them feel abandoned by the international community. They want peace, but they don't see much hope.
The economic situation in Bethlehem has also been hit hard. Tourism has dried up, leaving a lot of families struggling.
It's just heartbreaking, the human cost of this conflict.
All right. Well, let's shift now to the dangers faced by healthcare workers and journalists in Haiti.
We talked about that shooting at Haiti's largest public hospital. Sadly, it's not an isolated incident.
You're right. It's become incredibly dangerous for people in these essential professions.
Gangs see hospitals as something they can control, and journalists are targeted for reporting on the violence.
It highlights the breakdown of law and order.
The international community has to step up, help Haiti restore peace and security. The people deserve safety.
Okay. Well, now for a story that's sure to be interesting for art and history lovers. There's this new exhibition about how Indian artists have depicted the birth of Jesus.
It shows how artists in India over many centuries have visualized the nativity. They've used their own cultural influences.
It's amazing to see how this story, so important to Christianity, has been reinterpreted in a different culture.
Well, the Mughal Emperor Akbar was really important in introducing Christianity to northern India. He invited Jesuit missionaries to his court, and those missionaries, they brought European art with them. It had a big influence on Mughal court painters.
So there was this fusion of styles,
Yeah.
Mughal elements mixed with Christian iconography.
Exactly. There's this one painting that shows Emperor Jahangir in the nativity scene with Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus.
Wow, that's unexpected. What does it mean?
It shows how the Mughal rulers saw themselves, just rulers, promoting peace between religions, bringing different faiths together.
A message of tolerance, recognizing our shared humanity.
Exactly. The exhibition also features Gemini Roy. He was known for his Bengali folk art and Calicut paintings. He was inspired by the simplicity of Jesus' life and his message of sacrifice.
He saw a connection between Jesus and his own culture's understanding of sacrifice.
Right. He even compared Christ to the Santhal tribal people.
It's so interesting how he brought together spirituality and cultural identity.
The exhibition also features Angela de Fonseca, a Goan artist. He created a distinctly Indian Christian style. He portrays Mary as an Indian woman, wearing a sari.
He made it Indian.
Yeah. He challenged the Western way of portraying Christianity.
This exhibition sounds incredible.
It really is. It shows how powerful art can be, connecting different worlds, helping us understand different beliefs.
Well, that's it for part 2. We've covered a lot, from scandals and disasters to resilience and artistic expression.
It's been a journey through all these different human experiences.
In part 3, we'll talk more about Trump's foreign policy ideas. We'll also look at the struggles of Palestinian Christians.
And we'll explore those attacks on healthcare workers and journalists in Haiti.
Stay with us for more as we wrap up our look at the events shaping our world. Welcome back, everyone. This is the final part of our Christmas Day News Roundup. We've got a few more stories to explore. Let's start with former President Trump and his potential foreign policy approach if he gets a second term.
Yeah, his comments about Greenland and the Panama Canal, they've definitely raised some questions. People are worried about a more, well, maybe aggressive approach to foreign policy, possibly even isolationist.
His America First rhetoric, it puts U.S. interests above everything else, right? And it seems like he'd be willing to use economic and military power to achieve his goals. But that could cause friction with allies, disrupt global stability.
Definitely. And think about his focus on trade imbalances. He's said he thinks the U.S. is being treated unfairly by its allies. That could lead to more trade disputes, more tariffs, and those could disrupt markets, strain those relationships with key partners.
And then there are those pronouncements about taking control of territories, like Greenland. That could really escalate things diplomatically, make the global landscape a lot more unpredictable.
It seems like he wants to disregard international norms, act unilaterally, and that could destabilize the global order. It's definitely making a lot of world leaders nervous.
It's hard to say for sure what will happen, but it's created this sense of uncertainty.
Definitely. Okay, well, let's turn our attention to the occupied West Bank. It's been a particularly tough Christmas for Palestinian Christians this year.
War in Gaza has cast a shadow over everything, especially in Bethlehem.
So much devastation on both sides, Palestinians and Israelis. And for Palestinian Christians, it's especially hard. They're trapped in the middle.
A lot of them are feeling abandoned by the international community. They desperately want peace, but it feels so far away.
And the economic impact of the war is also hitting them hard. Tourism has dried up. Many families are struggling.
It's just a heartbreaking situation.
Okay, well, let's talk about the dangers that healthcare workers and journalists are facing in Haiti.
We talked about that shooting at the hospital, but that wasn't an isolated incident. It's getting really dangerous for people in those professions.
It's scary because those are such vital professions, and they're being targeted.
Gangs want to control the hospitals, and journalists are attacked for just doing their jobs, reporting on the violence.
It shows how bad the situation is, how much the law and order has broken down.
Right, and the international community needs to help Haiti restore peace and security. Those people deserve a chance at a normal life.
Well, that about wraps up our Christmas Day News Roundup. It's been quite a day, full of tragedy and conflict, but also some hope and resilience.
We've seen a lot of different aspects of humanity today, the good and the bad. Hopefully these stories have made you think, question things, maybe even inspired you to get involved.
We all have a role to play in making the world a better place.
Thanks for joining us today. We wish you all a peaceful and happy holiday season.